Alright, today I want to talk about how to know if we need to put an alternate airport on our IFR flight plan. So let's say we're planning a flight from A to B, and there's some weather at B, and we need to know, do we have to put an alternate on our flight plan? So how do we decide that? We use something called the 1, 2, 3 rule. Okay, so the way we know if we need an alternate is something we call the 1, 2, 3 rule. So what we have to do is look at the forecast for our destination and look at a time period around our ETA, our estimated time of arrival, 1 hour before to 1 hour after our ETA. So during that time period, if the forecasts are showing at least a 2,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility for that whole time period, then we don't need an alternate. And if the forecast is showing less than a 2,000 foot ceiling or less than 3 miles visibility or both for any part of that time period, then we do need an alternate. So this is the 1, 2, 3 rule. 1 hour before to 1 hour after, need at least a 2,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. And if we meet that criteria, we don't need an alternate. And this is the relevant regulation right here. Alright, so let's look at some examples. In this one, our destination is Mason City, Iowa. Our ETA is 1400 Zulu, and we want to know if we need an alternate. So we have to look at the time period around our ETA, an hour before to an hour after. So that's going to be 13Z to 15Z. Our ETA is 14Z. There's a from the 28th at 1400 group right here, but we're not just looking at that time, we're looking an hour before to an hour after. So before this period, we have this weather up here. And we need to look up through 15Z. This next chunk doesn't start till the 29th at 3 Zulu, so that's too far. We don't need to look at that. So it's going to end up being these first two lines we're going to look at here. So this first line here, we have 5 miles visibility in mist and broken at 500. Remember, a ceiling is the lowest layer that's broken or overcast. And in this case, this is broken, so that's a ceiling. And from the 28th at 1400, we have more than 6 miles visibility, scattered 800, that's not a ceiling, and broken at 10,000, that's a ceiling. So this is fine on its own, but we have to look at the forecast starting at 13Z, and that would fall into this first line here. And in that first line, we have a ceiling that's broken at 500. Well, we need at least a 2,000 foot ceiling if we don't want to have to put an alternate on our flight plan. In this case, we don't meet that requirement. So because of the ceiling in that part of the TAF, we don't meet the 1, 2, 3 rule, and we do require an alternate for this flight. Okay, here's another example. We're going to Omaha this time, ETA 1700 Zulu. So what is our time period? Well, an hour before to an hour after. So 1600 to 1800. Okay. Well, I've got this from group here that starts at 1600. That's the beginning of our time period. Okay, so we can start there. And then this next group here, the 29th at 2 Zulu. Well, we only need to look up through today at 18 Zulu, so this is too far. So really we only need to look at this one line in the TAF. So from the 28th at 16 Zulu, and that's going to continue on until 2Z, so that encompasses our whole 2 hour time period. We got more than 6 miles visibility and scattered at 25,000 feet, so there's no ceiling at all here, and the visibility is better than 6 miles. So this one's pretty simple. We definitely have better than a 2,000 foot ceiling and more than 3 miles visibility for this whole time period. So we do not need an alternate for this flight. Alright, one more example. We're going to LAF. I think that's Lafayette, Indiana, not sure. ETA 1700 Zulu. So we need to look at 1600 to 1800 and see if we meet the requirements. Well, conveniently, there's this chunk right here from the 28th at 1600 to the 28th at 1800. That's the exact time period we need. And during that time, we're showing 3 miles visibility in light rain, scattered at 500, not a ceiling though, and overcast at 2,000 feet. That is a ceiling. Well, so does that work? Well, the 1, 2, 3 rule says we need to have at least a 2,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility during the time period. Otherwise, we need an alternate. And if it's less than that, then we do need an alternate. So is it less than a 2,000 foot ceiling or less than 3 miles visibility? Well, no, it's not less than that. It's right at that, but that's okay. Right? 3 miles visibility, overcast 2,000. We're right at that requirement, but we're not below it. Okay. So if this was all we had to look at, then that would be great. We would not need an alternate. However, this is a tempo group, meaning temporarily from 16 Zulu on the 28th to 18 Zulu on the 28th, during that 2-hour chunk, for some of that time, these will be the conditions. For the portion of that 2-hour window that these are not the conditions for, then it's going to be whatever it was in the previous part of the forecast for the rest of that time period. So for some of this 2-hour chunk, they're forecasting 3 miles visibility, 2,000 foot ceiling, but not for that in the entirety from start to finish of that 2-hour window. And the part of that time period that doesn't have these conditions, it's going to be whatever was in the previous part of the forecast. So because of that, we do have to consider this first line here, where the visibility is okay, more than 6 miles, but the ceiling is pretty low, broken at 500, right? So in that case, we do need an alternate because we are definitely below a 2,000 foot ceiling here. Right, so this one's a little tricky because you have to remember that with this tempo group, only part of this time period is going to be these conditions. And the part of that time period that's not those conditions is whatever the previous part of the forecast was, which in this case is a ceiling of 500 feet, pretty low. So because of that, with this destination and this ETA, we do require an alternate. So hopefully that made sense. Drop any questions you have in the comments, and I'll do my best to get to them. And then in a different video, hope to address the selection of an alternate.